No.
And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider Sports Talk 1050 WTKA online at WTK.com. Sam Webb, I Rewind Travel on the other side. And it is that time, MGoBlog Roundtable time. We do it every week in the 9 o'clock hour on Thursdays. Joining us is the MGoBlog Crew. Let me introduce them, starting to my right on the screen. It's our good friend, the venerable one, as I call him, Craig Ross. Craig, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. To my bottom left is Mr. MGoBlog, part 2, if you will. And I think he was cheering just as much as I was when the Lions ran to the podium and they said, "Give us Aiden Hutchinson. There's no time to think." Seth, what did you think? You were very, very critical of the Lions.
What happened to my
losers?
The
card. Didn't you hand in the card, Seth?
What happened to my losers? I mean, they're just not acting like they'll be like Michigan running out there and like leading on NIL or something like that. Like, it surprised me that much. All right. I was so astounded. I can't. My voice is still gone from yelling so hard, Sam.
And in for a vacationing Brian Cook, also from MGoBlog, Dave Nasternak. Dave, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well, Sam. How are you guys doing?
Doing great, man. So I guess I'll just throw it out to all you guys just briefly on the draft. Big takeaways, even if it's just focused on the Michigan guys. I liked all the landing spots for the Michigan guys.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was Baltimore, seems like, and
in New England.
Yeah, and so it seems maybe from a recruiting point of view, it would be a selling point for players that, worst case scenario will at least get you, a spot on the bus or an opportunity in Baltimore. But yeah, I thought the Michigan players did well. And, in terms of the Lions, I didn't quite know whether they were running up there that quickly to save themselves from themselves, to make sure they didn't change their mind, or that they just couldn't believe that Jacksonville, had done what they did. But whatever it was, you saw that the NFL criticized Detroit.
Yeah, they did. They wanted some drama there.
They wanted some drama.
That makes me think all of that Kayvon Thibodeau talk was the NFL manufacturing a storyline, because you could not take Aiden Hutchinson there, Seth. Like, this was such a no-brainer.
The NFL like created their own storyline. No, Sam, that could not possibly happen. They're a very serious organization. They're professionals. These are not amateurs, okay? Man, but like, so someone put out a chart recently. I'm blanking on the name right now, but there's a really cool chart about like the amount of production you get per position based off of how much college production. And the interesting thing was defensive end, more than I thought defensive end would be a lot more, develop the guys, right? Like, someone who can just has bend and you teach them how to play. It's actually the opposite. The guys who have a lot of college production really translate. And the guys who don't, I guess coaches can't develop players as well as they think they can. So, I mean, that says a lot about the Lions pick of Hutchinson, because, if you get a Bosa, he's probably going to produce in the NFL. You get a Watt, he's probably going to produce like a Watt in the NFL. And there's very few misses of guys like that. And when they are, their personality misses, which probably isn't going to be a problem with Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah. I like the landing spot for Dax. Dax immediately, and if you go to the depth chart now, the projected depth chart for Cincinnati, I don't care the site, they have him replacing Eli Apple, and that was the spot on that defense. You're like, man, they got to figure something out. He's just a sieve, right? And Dax, what do we like about him? His positional versatility, safety, nickel, corner. Sounds like they're going to slide him right in there as a starting corner. I think he's going to thrive.
Well,
down there in Cincinnati.
They took another safety right after him from the Big Ten too, so it looked like they were really trying to redo their entire secondary. And I think they had some injuries last year as well, and so that was probably always coming. But Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure he's going to get on the field pretty quickly.
Yeah. Eli Apple was just there. I didn't realize like there are YouTube like videos just dedicated to his ineptitude. Like, look how bad Eli Apple is.
Is it like the Jameis Winston interception video from a couple of
That's
years ago?
That's
You should
exactly
do a
what it's
matchup with
like.
him and Okuda. Who was coaching these guys in college? You got to wonder, like you look at a guy like that and you're like, who was coaching them? Who was, because I mean, you learn how to play football in college. Who was coaching those guys? Where did they go to school? I'm like thinking of Jeff Okuda, Eli Apple. Like there's just so many guys like that. You think they're gonna be so talented, and they just don't work out.
Man,
Yeah.
one win and we just start running our mouths.
Yeah, and listen,
Oh, I've been
listen.
running my mouth about Kerry Coombs a long time. Sam can tell you this.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and listen, look, that Orange Bowl, that playoff game, I just, coming out of that game, I was like, man, how did Alabama beat that squad? I mean, Jameson Williams is really a dude, right? I felt like there was some vulnerability in that Georgia defense after the SEC championship, and got into the game against Michigan. It's like, wow. Then you see the NFL draft with 5 first-round picks. 5 first-round picks. And you look at the mocks from next year, guys, 3 more first-round picks. This was an entire defense of first-round picks for all intents and purposes that they fielded. This feels like, you remember how we used to talk about that Miami team with Sean Taylor and all those guys?
The 0-2.
It feels like Georgia is the latest incarnation of that.
I mean, we saw it when they were recruiting. Keep in mind, too, Nakobe Dean is a first-round talent. He was the best player on that defense. And he only dropped because there was a pectoral injury that everyone was worried about. So, yeah, I mean, this is a result. I've been talking to a Georgia guy about this all week on Twitter. If you go back just a few years and you see how recruiting just kind of everyone collected at the top. Right? Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia were just cleaning up to a level that you've never seen before in the sports history. Fast forward 3 years, that talent is now going to the NFL, and they're all coming from the same teams. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's this whole system with the 4 teams in the playoffs, so no one else can compete, right? And that's what it all goes back to. Just the system you have has been putting kids into the teams that go to the playoffs every year, or at least look like they're going to. And I'm credit to Georgia for, getting themselves in there when it looked like Michigan was going to hone in instead.
Yeah. Good grief. They are really freaking good. I agree with you on Nakobe Dean. I was surprised that the Lions didn't jump on him in the second round. Kind of surprised that they didn't move on the guy that Craig said they should have taken it number 2. I guess we could close out our draft conversation talking about, I hate to do it, Craig, but Malik Willis number 2 overall. You were riding hard for that one.
No, only
Aiden wasn't there.
Right. Only if Aiden wasn't there. Correct. Now, I still think now we'll see what happens with Willis, but I think Willis is going to become Josh Allen, and people are going to be kicking themselves over him. I could be wrong. I'm wrong about most things probably, but I still think there's a reasonable chance he becomes Josh Allen, and people will look back and say, what were we doing? I agree with you about Nakobe Dean. I thought he was the best player on the Georgia defense. I mean, and an incredibly good defense. I thought he to me, when we went to that game, and I was just blown away by Dean and his speed on the field. So
is that why Ryan Tannehill said that he didn't want to mentor? Because, oh no, here comes another Josh Allen.
Yeah. That guy's feeling pretty insecure these days. He talked about being in a deep, dark hole after the playoff loss. So I'm not surprised that he's saying, I'm not going to help the guy that they brought in to replace me eventually. We
got Jordan Love 2.0, right?
Right, exactly.
You can't just transfer. Can't you do that in the NFL? Oh, wait, there's a reason.
There's
Is that a segue, Sam? Did I segue for you?
You did segue. It was an excellent segue, Seth. You've been doing this for a while, man, and that is the exact order that I want to go in, because we'll save Hunter and talk NIL. That'll be the crescendo to the MGoBlog Roundtable, but right now it's about Frankie. And saw it coming, guys. I mean, I don't know. I can't remember how much of this we talked about on air, but I know we talked about it off air that Frankie was, it was not looking good, especially if they moved on a guard, which they did in Jalen Llewellyn. No surprise that as soon as that happened, Frankie was in the portal.
Well, I'm still a little confused by it. I mean, Michigan lost 3 guards this year. Devontae is gone. Eli's gone. Zeb Jackson's gone. So they were left with 3 guards in the program. It seemed pretty axiomatic that Juwan had to bring in someone in the backcourt. If you got one guy hurt, you're down to 2 guards, and you're going to go through the season with 2. There's really no one else on this roster who can play guard. So it's sort of, I'm not so sure that Frankie's leaving really had anything to do with Jalen Llewellyn, even though there's some noise that it might be. But it seems somewhat weird to me, given the fact that a guard is coming into this program. Juwan is not an idiot. He's not going through the season with 3 guards. And it would be good if one of them can play, off ball too, because we have nothing of that's proven at all there. And as it turns out, Jalen Llewellyn was an off ball guard at Princeton. Even though he can play the point, probably he was an off-ball guard in that system.
He's a little more ball dominant than we've been giving him credit for. And I admit part of the reason why I was downplaying that was because I knew Frankie Collins was kind of on the fence about leaving, and I wanted to make sure that at least for my part, I was saying no, he's a shooting guard. He's a shooting guard. They have a very center-oriented offense, and
right.
I mean, that's not going to be that's something that's going to be true at Michigan too, right? Dickinson is who we're going to run the offense through here, but he is a ball dominant guy. He's a guy who's going to take shots off the dribble. And if Michigan got into a situation where they were behind, they were going to pull Frankie and put Tristan Llewellyn at. I'm never going to be able to say this.
No, he's in the penalty box.
My voice is gone. Okay, I can't say anything right now. Well, Michigan was probably going to pull Frankie and put in Tristan because
Jalen.
God, boy. Yeah. Yeah, they're going to pull Frankie because he can't shoot, right? So if you get behind and you need shooting on the court, well, he can't shoot. But that's what a smart team does. That's what a team that wins does. I think that Frankie transferred a few times in high school too. I think that his family kind of feels that they're responsible for finding that, maximizing what he's going to be. And that's kind of what they felt they had to do. So he's gone. There's not a whole lot more we can talk about it, but if it wasn't the era of open transfers, then probably wasn't happen. There wasn't the era of open NIL. It probably doesn't happen. But, this is the kind of thing that Michigan's going to have to deal with until they get their stuff together.
Well, the other thing that interests me here is Juwan likes ball screens. And, unlike John Beilein, who had to get pulled into ball screens by Bakari and
Laval.
Trey Burke, Laval.
It was actually before Trey Burke. It was Darius Morris.
Demo was just incredible on the pick and roll. That was the one thing he could really do.
Yeah, that made him a viable player.
It did. It did. And but Frankie last year on ball screens was 0.76 points per ball screen event, which is terrible. And in Kobe, for example, the data points are more limited, was 1.18, and T. Will was incredible, 1.38. Really high numbers on ball screens for Kobe and T. Will, and really low numbers for Frankie. And Llewellyn was 1.05, which is pretty good. Incidentally, Shannon was terrible on ball screens at Texas Tech last year. He was awful, beyond awful. And so it seems to me that when Juwan is looking at the big picture, he probably wants someone who can play in that sort of style. Frankie may be able to, he just hadn't shown it yet, and it didn't work well last year. But Llewellyn can. And so, the downside for Michigan, of course, is I'm not sure if Llewellyn is much of a defender. Devontae wasn't when he came in, but became passable. Mike Smith wasn't, but became better over the course of the year.
Those guys had Eli Brooks next to them, and
that's true.
Kobe Buffkin's still on the learning curve as far as defense. Now, he could get a lot better over the offseason, but I mean, now he has to, because you were looking at Frankie taking away, a team's best guard, and now you're not going to have that, and you don't really
Frankie
have any
could
way
play
to
defense. Frankie can
Doug's not going to do that.
Yeah, one of the things, and I think this is a pitfall of fandom. You sort of take what makes sense to you and apply it to them. And, the argument that you made earlier, Craig, I think is spot on. Like, you got to bring in a guard. You got to bring in some more shooting. You can actually play together. I saw Jalen Llewellyn as Eli Brooks part 2, right? That's what I saw that move as being. Mm-hmm. But go back to in the season or during the season, there were rumblings about Frankie not being happy and maybe looking to transfer. Rumblings that died down. As I said over the MichiganInsider.com, rumblings that died down during the season as he started to play more, but came roaring back as soon as Sam Sessom's name is mentioned. That's since been confirmed by Phil Martelli publicly. I guess he did an interview with him live and he mentioned that Sam Sessoms came up. And next thing you know, they're getting calls like, "What's up with Sessoms?" And they get the reply like, "Juwan hasn't even talked." I mean, he's mentioning us. Juwan hasn't talked to him. But when I heard that, it's like, oh yeah, man, it's because knowing they have to look at a guard as soon as there is a guy that they talk to, he's probably going to go. And that's exactly what happened. It doesn't have to make sense to you or I, Craig, or Dave or Seth. Only matters what makes sense to them. What makes sense to them is he needs to go someplace where there aren't as many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak.
Frankie just wanted to go play with Josh Christopher.
Yeah. I was gonna mention, Arizona State, how good are they at developing players? I mean, that's part of it. And remember, he only gets one transfer, right?
He can transfer again. He has to get a waiver.
Get a waiver, right? And no one's really tested that yet because everyone's got a free transfer right now. But I mean, Frankie seems like, I don't know, man. I wouldn't want to be stuck at Arizona State. It's fun. It's a fun school. Don't get me wrong, but if you're trying to develop yourself and get your game up to the point where you're going to make it on the next level, I'm not sure I want to be at Arizona State. But I can't make that decision for him, and I'm sure he's making that decision based off of what their needs are right now. It's just Michigan would be able to combat some of this by saying, "Look, we understand you're upset about your playing time. You're still going to get a lot of playing time. Look at the roster. Look what role you're going to have, right? And if there's an issue with anything else, we have a lot of money here at the University of Michigan. Let's just get this done." So I think that's got to be a piece of it too. And Michigan just is not competing on that level right now where they can do that, where they can. So they're always going to be coming from behind on all these kinds of conversations with their own players and with other people's players and with players who haven't committed anywhere yet.
Yeah. Quick question about what people were saying on the blog when reports came out last week. Well, it wasn't a report when Imani Bates hits the portal, right? Eventually, there's some, there's some. Well, I wonder where he's going to wind up. Then there start to be rumblings about Michigan, and as soon as I heard them, I did some checking, and no one, and I say no one in Michigan circles that I spoke to knew anything about it. You talk to folks on AAU and high school circles, there are all kind of rumors left and right, but nothing in the form of corroboration from folks in Maize and Blue circles. And so as I went to the board, I said, guys, listen, I don't know what to tell you. We were telling him last time. I don't know what to tell you about why this is out there, but there's nothing to suggest that he's on Michigan's radar. Maybe unless Juwan is pulling a clandestine recruitment, but it doesn't look like it's going to be in the cards for Michigan. That report has since been echoed by Matt Norlander from CBS that he's here. Michigan isn't involved. MLive eventually reported that as well. So they're talking to folks and they aren't hearing anything about Michigan's involvement. So I wonder what the reaction to that has been on the blog.
I stayed away from the message board for the most part when that was going on, but people got excited just because the name rings and everyone knows him around here. But I'm pretty sure that was coming from Amani himself. That one of our guys in our Slack chat said, "Yeah, Scarlett Johansson's number 6 on my list too." But Michigan just does not want any part of that, right? Like everyone around town, everyone who lives in Ypsilanti knows. Like, we know people who had kids at the elementary school that the Bateses kind of took over for a little bit to turn into like a fake school that he was going to. Like that, it is such a show, and Michigan, we have enough drama in Michigan. We don't need to like import it with that. So I'm sure that was. They didn't even care about like what he could do for the team, and like God, we have forwards coming out of our ears. Like the last.
I was going to say, do they need another 3-4?
Right.
I mean, there's like 2 that we haven't even played this year.
Yeah, so I think that was coming from Amani because if you ask him who are you interested in, well, I think he personally probably liked Michigan. I'm sure that his family wants to be back in town because this is where they're from. So I think that's where that was coming from.
It's interesting. I heard a podcast with Dennis Fithian and Matt Derry, I think his name is, and Fithian kept pushing the Bates to Michigan idea, and I thought
something he wanted to see or something that he was hearing.
No, something he was hearing.
Oh.
And Derry kept saying his exact quote is Michigan isn't going near that, and this is crazy talk, and Dennis kept pushing it. So I was really surprised. Of course, I think it was announced this week, wasn't it? Amani's going to Louisville.
I hadn't seen that. I know there's talk that's the lean. I know our Travis Branham put in a crystal ball for Louisville. I still think he could be, depending on the situation that he steps into, he's a tremendous talent. He's still the best freshman that I've seen. I compared it to other than KD. I mean, that's how good of a freshman he was. I mean, OJ Mayo and KD were the best freshman guys I had seen. And that's the kind of season he had. It just, the trajectory hasn't stayed the same. I thought his sophomore year was great, but as he got into his junior season, that's where you started to see some flaws emerge when it came to shot selection and discipline and sharing the ball. I guess, but if it's your team, I mean, are you really?
Where he should have gone? He should have gone where he originally committed. He should have gone to State. I mean, Tom Izzo would have been, all over that guy, right? Like, talk about someone who just needs, a psychopath all over him, who makes him the worst version of himself, so he stays in college for 4 years, to gets away from his family.
Coaching the way I got to coach and practice the way I got to practice.
I mean, what a perfect, and the guy complains about every single call. I mean, Izzo would be right there backing him up. I mean, it would have been perfect, and because was it Atkins, the guy they got?
Yeah, that was it.
Akins, yeah. That guy couldn't stand him, so he could have come to Michigan, and we would have had that guy, and we'd be fine with a point guard right now. Everyone would be so much happier. Everyone
this is big time athletics.
Yeah, but yeah,
that's for Bates' parents, but whatever.
It was just a weird sequence of events. Here you had in about a month's time, two guys list Michigan that Michigan really wasn't courting. First Sessoms, and then Amani Bates. But like I said, I still believe he can be a tremendous player. Hopefully, wherever he lands up is able to put him back on that track. But let's take a break, because when we come back on the other side, now we got to dive into Hunter Dickinson. I've been telling you guys that Hunter had a lot to say. Well, you've since heard what he had to say about NIL and Michigan's approach. And so we will dive into that on the other side here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, the ticket. What are you doing, Craig?
Wardrobe change.
I'm trying to get her.
Like a true tennis player.
There we go. Now we're retweeted. This is great, quiet radio for everybody here, isn't it? Hi.
Oh, there we go. Okay,
Okay.
so I was talking and you couldn't hear me.
No.
My bad.
No, I was wondering what was Craig doing. Craig is like, man, Craig is stripping on live.
He's in a basketball. He's got his basketball shirt on now.
This is what happens when the
Remember, Sam, he says he's a big Rich Reddy fan, and Rich does things on the screen too.
Hey,
Yeah,
Rich is my man. I love Rich Reddy.
yeah. Rich comes on the video rubbing his pecs every week now.
Is that right? He's working out.
Yeah, I guess. Rich is childhood friends with Ben Johnson, so you know how Rich gets down.
I know it seemed to be the case. I mean, so he's
but no, fleshing out what Michigan can and can't do, I think is a good jump off for us as far as NIL is concerned, and what more they can do in here now. Because here's what they can do. Technically, what Hunter was asking for, talking about, technically, legally, they could do. They can't get deals for prospective student athletes, but according to the law, they could get deals for current student athletes. Problem is, and this would be the question for a lawyer, if they got Hunter a deal, do you have to get a deal for a female? Do you have to get the same deals for female student athletes that you get for male student athletes? Would be the legal question. The practical question is, if you go about the business of getting deals for members of a team, are you nurturing conflict? If you got a deal for Cade McNamara and you didn't get it for JJ, or vice versa.
Is that coming up across the country though?
I know that there have been. What you mean? Are schools technically getting deals themselves? This is where you bring in the
No.
party.
I mean, is there like pushback for that? Like, player X is getting this amount.
Oh yeah.
And then,
I can tell you. I know
the
that
team, the same thing.
Yeah, that's inevitable though. I know Michigan's dealt with that. Michigan absolutely is dealing with that now.
Well, I know, but I mean,
so and so got such and such deal. What about me? Fortunately, they can't say, hey, Michigan, you got this deal for them. Why aren't you getting it for me? That's not happening. But are there issues with what someone else is getting and what I'm not getting? Absolutely. Coaches got to learn, and programs and schools have to figure out how to deal with that. But that's a separate discussion from what I'm talking about. The school facilitating a deal for a specific player, while possible legally, it does create does have some maybe Title IX implications. Curious your opinion on that, Craig.
Yeah,
and it definitely has some practical issues that could emerge.
My guys are coming back in 10 seconds.
Not my area of expertise, but I'm skeptical of the Title IX problem in the short term, because schools will just say, we didn't do anything. All we did was make our students, our athletes available to other people, and then it becomes a strict, well, what will you do for us? Here's what we'll do for you.
We are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider, Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, online at WTKA.com. Sam Webb, Ira Weintraub on the other side, and the MGoBlog Roundtable crew. We have Seth Fisher, we have Craig Ross, we have Dave Nasternak in the building. And so, guys, Hunter Dickinson, never one to mince words. I think we know this about Hunter, right? He has been very consistent in voicing his displeasure with the NIL approach for Michigan behind the scenes. He has obviously since gone public with his displeasure about the current approach, and I'm curious, just starting with you, Seth, your reaction to what Hunter had to say.
I mean, it's nothing that we haven't heard from a lot of athletes already, right? Hunter is saying the quiet part out loud, and I'm glad somebody at Michigan is finally taking leadership and talking about this out loud, because Michigan could be very good at this. Now, I understand, we were just talking in the break about there being Title IX implications. I don't think that's going to be as big of an issue because the money's not coming directly from Michigan. They're facilitating. But Hunter is right that everybody else is functioning in one world. And Michigan, for some reason, is following the letter of a law that the NCAA passed because they had to and had no intention of enforcing. And there's already states who are passing laws saying that you can't even do it that way, right? Tennessee and Mississippi have already passed laws. So there's no way that Michigan can just sit back and let all this happen and pretend that, like, we're not Iowa, okay? We're not just going to sit on the side and just grab farm boys and no one ever finds out about what other people are getting paid. And Hunter Dickinson is right. Michigan should be leading, and Michigan is in a great position to lead. So we should stop just being worried about someone opening their mouths and be glad that someone finally is, and then start saying, here's how, because you can look down the line, big picture. What's this going to look like in a few years? Players are going to have to be on contracts because the schools don't like the players are going to move around so much and that everyone can offer anybody thing, right? And the market is not going to function like a regular market because you have boosters involved. We're just going to throw money at things, not caring if they make money off of it or not. So you don't have the normal checks that you would have in a normal market. So there has to be some sort of regulation on this, and there has to be parties who can deal that way, which means some form of players union or someone representing the players, and someone on the NCAA side, because the NCAA isn't doing it, who's going to take some leadership as well. Michigan could step into that power vacuum and say, here's how it should be. Here's a good way to do it, and put together a program that pays their athletes better than anyone else's athletes and makes sense and is going to work for everybody else if they want to use that system too. They just do it. The NCAA can't do anything to them. Just step up and make the world that you want to live in.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we don't even really know exactly what the Michigan world of NIL is. I mean, if it's anything at all. I mean, we don't exactly know what Michigan is saying to athletes, what they've organized, or anything else. Do we? I mean, I haven't heard or read anything about systemically what Michigan is doing.
We're starting to hear little snippets from people, though.
Yeah, we're hearing snippets, and it's interesting. Yesterday, this isn't just a Michigan problem, though, but Seth is right. It would be great if Michigan sort of jumped out and said, here's what we're going to do, and here's what we think the rules are, and what makes sense for us, and others might want to follow this model. But yesterday, I think it was yesterday, in fact, the SEC, what's his name, Sankey, commissioner, and the commissioner from the Pac whatever it is,
Pac-12, yeah.
Pac-12, they went to Washington and talked to two senators, asking them. They said, hey, our conferences are completely confused about what the rules are. We think there needs to be federal legislation telling us what the rules are. Now, one of these two senators was pretty smart, and one of them is adult, but but I'll leave it at that. And so what will come out of this, I have no idea. But when the SEC and the PAC, who are pretty, different in sort of where they start vis-a-vis athletics, are both going to Washington and saying, we don't know what to do. The NCAA is essentially abdicated. We'd like, Congress to pass rules and laws telling us, what we can do and how we should go about this. Well, my guess is everyone is scrambling, that no one really knows what you can do or what you should do.
So you did have Mark Emmert, I guess, you kind of dismiss anything he had to say, right? Because you figure He's just a figurehead. He's always looking to abdicate responsibility. Congress, please come save us.
Yeah.
Right? Was his initial play. But there does need to be federal legislation to balance this equation. If you have different states going at it differently, you're going to have some imbalance. You're going to have some have a competitive advantage. So I think because this is like one of the few bipartisan things that they address, compensating student athletes, Republican, Democrat, they all seem to be thinking in the same vein here. I actually think there's some hope of some legislation coming from this. I just don't know how far down the line that's going to be. In the interim, to Seth's point, I actually think that there's a middle ground here between what Hunter is talking about and what Michigan is doing. I think that there is an argument for, not being Cowboy, not being Miami in this, because I don't want what they just went through last week. If you are courting prospects and the only consideration is NIL, I think you're setting up a culture of volatility in your program. If you get a player strictly because you are the highest NIL bidder, the odds of you losing that player for the same reason, I think is unreasonably high, at least to me. Now, should that be a part of the criteria that leads a player to come to your institution? Absolutely. Should Michigan be more aggressive in the NIL space? I think so. And I think that we see examples here in this state. I mean, you look at Ishbia and what he's doing up at Michigan State, as uncomfortable as it may be to have that level of booster involvement. That is the only way through right now in order to get this done. Have some sort of third-party interest representing your interest. You have to deal with what the quid pro quo of that is, because you're not going to have every booster, every donor that is doing it just out of the goodness of their heart, just doing it because they love Michigan. Some will, but not all of them. They're gonna
that is
some allowances, right?
That was Michigan's power, actually. When I've talked to people who know how things work, especially a couple guys from the SEC, 2 different SEC schools, when I asked them, what do you really wish you had from Michigan? And they said, your boosters don't get nearly involved as ours do, right? You look at like Texas, they make you dance, right? And you look at Ole Miss, like the boosters want to have like weekly meetings with the players and stuff. Like there are a lot of things that go on that Michigan didn't have to deal with, because like Stephen Ross is like, look, you tell me where to put my money and I'll put it there. Right. And they told him we need athletic facilities, and we need a business school, because that's what we're going to recruit off of. And what did he do? He gave us $200 million to build beautiful athletic facilities and a gorgeous business school. Right. Well, his next check, Hunter Dickinson suggested 10% of that should go to the players. 10% of that would be $20 million. What does $20 million look like if you just have that pool and it's coming from Stephen Ross? It's not coming from the program, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
it's about
what does
one
that
football
look
recruiting
like?
class.
It's a Texas A&M football recruiting class. All right, you could do a lot athletically, and then that answers all your questions. How come he's getting paid? I'm not. Yes, you are. Here's which we're getting everybody something here, and if you come to Michigan, you're going to have this kind of support, and you're not going to have to go dance for that guy. And Michigan's had those people for now. I know we have donors who want to get in because they want access and things like that. But when you have a guy like Stephen Ross that you can hold over them, you can say, look, we can get it from him, and he doesn't ask for anything. So, I mean, there has to be some things you can offer those guys, but you have a lot of donors who are going to want to just support the team more for this school than other schools. And that is a very strong thing that Michigan has going for them in this world if they jump in.
Yeah, so that is the way through right now, at least one of the ways through. Like you said, you can get a collective deal that pays everyone something, sort of like the Ishbia deal. That's not Michigan State directly, but come on. There's like an understanding. There's like a wink and a nod. Like, come on, let's get this done. That's what
But Matt's a good example too, because Matt doesn't have major demands. He does have a couple demands, but I'm going to get into that. But and they could get hurt by those demands down the road. But his thing is you have to support the coaches, right? So Matt's whole thing is, I'm going to do this for you guys, but you're not going to be jumping around on different coaches all the time. We're going to pay Mel and we're going to have him comfortable here. We're going to take care of Izzo and he's going to be comfortable here. And that's what his needs are. When you have boosters like that, that is an advantage you have over the Southern schools. Just go and use that.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how quickly they move in that space. Because again, I just don't think, while I think legislation is inevitable, I do feel that way because like this is one of the few bipartisan things. I just don't know that it'll be quick. And so if you aren't going to lose ground, you got to come up with something a lot quicker. You see different ways in order to bridge the gap. I mean, whether it's having some sort of interest come in and fund an NIL for the entire athletic department or specific teams, or academic incentives. Ohio State just did an academic incentive program. Can you believe it? Where you can get $6,000. You can get $6,000 worth of academic incentives. Now I don't know where they set that bar. Like what's academic achievement at Ohio State that gets you that? but it's there, right? That's a creative way in order to compensate student athletes further. So those are the kinds of things that in the interim, while you figure out what the rules are going to be. If you're uncomfortable with what some of the other programs are doing, those are some examples of the doing more than what you're doing now and still being short of the wild west that you see going on down in Miami.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I have a question for David. I'd like to switch gears really quickly because what is Mel our coach next year, David, in your opinion? I mean, because I found Kurt Svoboda's message to be sort of a non-denial denial.
I mean, have they made an official announcement?
Well, no, but Svoboda said Mel is our head coach. We will broadly communicate any changes to his contract when that is finalized. Well, I could read that about 3 different ways, and it was generally reported that, well, Mel, this means Michigan must know that there were no major problems in the program and Mel's coming back. I didn't read it that way. I read it like, well, he's our coach for now. We're sort of waiting to see what happens from the law firm report. I don't know.
Unless the university comes out and says something specifically, and that, like you said, wasn't overly specific. I mean, yeah, I'm going to kind of assume that he's the coach today and tomorrow and next week. But beyond that, what can I really say? What can anyone really say? I mean, it just seems sort of open, not fully open, like there's a vacancy, but more of a kick the can down the road, at least through part of the summer.
Isn't it reasonable to assume, and admittedly, this is a guess, but just picking up on what we were saying the last time we talked about this, isn't it reasonable to assume that they're waiting for the report? And then once they have the report, then this will move along one way or the other?
Sure, but when is that? I mean,
I have no idea.
Could that be? I mean, they can't wait too long, right? I mean, like, you're going to have training camp or fall camp starting in August or September. So, like, I don't know. Craig is probably more familiar with this sort of thing in terms of when law firms issue these things. I know their investigation had to conclude, what was it, like a week ago or 10 days ago or something like that. So I guess however long it takes to write something up,
I get the feeling that Michigan, because they were in the period when coaches were moving around and it was probably the best time if you had to move on. And he was not under contract anymore. If Michigan didn't have some sort of word, it was probably a draft version or more likely some verbal version, right? Someone said, okay, we didn't find anything, right? And they can't do anything directly until they have the report and they go over it themselves and other people go over it too. But this is just my guess, but I think that they would have moved and they would have let him go because it was too easy not to, if they had a belief that there was going to be anything bad in there. And if you're waiting for a report, the only thing that could make you not have, the only thing that could convince you that there isn't something bad in there, at least in my opinion, if I'm waiting for this thing, is if someone tells me you got nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, and that's certainly one reading of the Savota comments uh, is that Michigan, either through their own investigation or by things that have been said to them by the law firm, have decided, well, whatever problems are here are not either A, particularly substantial, or B, directly sufficiently connected to Mel, um, so that they felt comfortable saying something that sounded like, yeah, Mel still has his job. We're working on his contract. I mean,
But
that's,
they have to keep their options open, right? Like
they
you
have to
can't,
keep
you
their
can't,
options open
yeah.
because we have to wait and see what they actually say, or what they actually conclude as to what was going on within the
Right.
program.
Right. Now we cannot discount, because this is the University of Michigan and we have a very recent history. We cannot
Yeah.
discount the possibility that Michigan, just wants it all to go away, and they're not dealing on the up and up. But I'm just guessing, based off of the information that we have and what's in front of us, that the way that an organization like Michigan would normally operate is they would not continue with a guy, even if he's a great recruiter, even if he has success this year, when you have an out, if they did not have some sort of belief that they're fine.
I mean, you would think that does make some sense. It's also then at some point you have to act on it as well. And I understand that, it's May 5th, so it's not doesn't need to be happen tomorrow, but it does, you would think, need to happen at some point.
Yeah, so let's assume, for the sake of I think we all agree that it's likely that he'll be retained. He'll be signed to an extension. I think that's what we expect. So assuming that's the case, Dave, what's the outlook for next season?
I mean, they're bringing in a really, really good class. And you look at sort of who some of the other teams in the Big Ten have lost. I mean, Michigan is probably going to be definitely top 2, I would say, in the Big Ten. Minnesota's pretty loaded. They're bringing in some guys, and actually a lot of the drafted players that we thought would leave from Minnesota or could leave, a lot of them stayed. So they're kind of bringing back what Michigan had last year. They're going to be probably favored to be a 1 or 2 seed in the tournament, assuming things play out. They have probably 4 or 5 high impact forwards coming in right away, and they return a lot of their defensemen, so they can sort of shield their 1 or 2 guys in Casey and Brostevich, who can work themselves into the lineup. And obviously when you have a really good goalie you're bringing back in Portillo, I mean, that's a really, really, it's sort of the Hunter Dickinson thing, right? Like, you set the floor really, really high. So, and this is sort of what you kind of expect under Mel going forward. It's what he's had since he's been able to get his recruiting classes in. I mean, as Brian has said for a long time, hockey recruiting is different than other sports where you're always 2, 3, 4 years out. So once those classes start rolling in, this is kind of a Control C, Control V type situation. And it just kind of comes down to, how are each individual players going to adapt to the college game? How physically ready are they? And, you're never going to truly know until they see the ice, but you look at what you think is probably going to happen. You look at some translation of younger numbers into what they will be. I mean, I think they're going to compete for the Big Ten title. I don't know that they're going to be the most talented team, but they had as much talent as anyone, and sometimes you lose in overtime too.
Yeah, I think Michigan, I know David and Alex Drain don't agree with me on this, but I think Michigan will be better next year.
Wow.
I think they're going to be a better team next year.
Well, let's save it. Make that case next week. So that's what we're leaving on. Craig thinks Michigan's hockey team will be better after an all-timer, great roster.
Yep.
They're going to be better after losing all those first-round draft picks. All right. So I'll have you explain that next week. Until then, folks, always great to talk to you. We'll see you tomorrow with special guests in studio. The King of Philly, Phil Martelli, the pride of Lansing, but he's making his home in Ann Arbor, Sadie Washington. So we're going to have at least 2 of the 3 assistant coaches in studio tomorrow for a basketball roundtable of sorts. So be sure to tune in tomorrow here on the Michigan Insider. Sports Talk 1050, WTK, the ticket, the official